Hi, it's LaVonne. Welcome back to my channel and to Step by Step. Today we're painting this little cute nightstand. I just love it. It's got some condition issues, but open the drawer, it's got a cute little paper in there, a marble paper, and I like that. It has a nice little shelf in there. So it's a great little piece, very sturdy. It has a few things. So like here, the latch, whenever you close it, it just goes the whole way in, a little too far. So that clasp there, it just needed straightened up a little bit. So that was one of the things I did. I just kind of turned it right and pounded it in better. There is a circular shaped, what do you call it, a divot or something in the piece. This was worse than it looked. It was a surface piece, and that is like a glue mark. There must have been something, another piece that was attached to this or something somehow, and then the back plate was a little loose. I inspected that situation, and there wasn't really much I could do about it, and I thought I will, paint it, straighten it up, and if anybody is going to wiggle it, then, they deserve to have it snap off, but it's not that unstationary, if you will, so I think it'll be fine. So the glue marks, basically they just sanded right off and it became very smooth, so that wasn't an issue. So that just came off real easily, and so you can see the surface is scratched up a little bit. Normally we tell you you don't have to sand when you use the products, but you do have to inspect these older pieces for prep. So Dixie Belle mud is one of my favorite things to use. It was very helpful for me in filling those little divots that were on that piece there. So you just spread it on and use something disposable, because you don't want to rinse this down your sink. So I always just use a plastic knife. So just kind of put it on and then remove a little bit of the excess. It's really easy to do. It looks like icing, doesn't it? So just removing some of the excess. I was super anxious to paint this piece because it was over the Christmas break, and I really wanted to get my hands back on a paintbrush. So I'm using a heat gun from Harbor Freight, and remember that a heat gun is much different than a hair dryer. It dries it so fast, like in seconds. So it's a great tool to have. And you can see I sanded it down, and that is just filled in, and you don't even know it was there once it's painted. So I'm getting started with the painting, and I'm using cotton from Dixie Belle, which is the whitest white that we have. So picture sheets out on the line. I knew that I wanted this piece to be white. I knew that part, but that center part that looks like a crest, I was wondering, I was going to go in two different directions. So I have some transfers from DesignwithPrima, and one of them is a little gingham pattern, and I did a chest previously in that, and it sold before I got it out on the floor. Someone saw me working on it, so I thought, well, I could do a lather, rinse, repeat with that and see if that one goes, or I could do a little floral and do a tinted wax. So I just started painting, and I figured I would figure it out later, and that I did. Many times when you paint with an older piece of wood, no matter what the color it is, you should use Boss. Boss is a blocker for oils and odors and stains, tannins in the wood, and also glue marks. So sometimes that yellows. But for whatever reason, I decided it was a light wood, because mainly it's darker woods like cherry and mahogany. Sometimes you can paint a cherry piece and it'll turn out pink because the tannins in the wood bleed through. But anyway, I started painting this piece right off the bat. I think I was just so anxious to paint, but I knew there was a risk of bleed through. So it wasn't bad, but I did get a little bit, and I will show you that later. But I love you can see I'm a little bit of a sloppy painter at times. I had just washed that brush, so there was probably some water remaining in the base of the bristles. So I'm using a Dixie Belle brush, and this, I believe, is a flat one. I'm already at the second coat here, but I just like you to see how you get around the details. And I also painted the handles on this piece. Sometimes it's a choice to remove them. I knew I wanted to paint right over everything. I just love the detail in this piece, and I wanted you to see the second coat coverage here. It's great. For a white over a wood finish, I think the second coat coverage is fantastic. So comment if you love this piece. I just love working on pieces with details. When I work on pieces that don't have many details, then I like to get the molds out and all that stuff and fancy it up. But here you don't have to rely on those things. It's just sometimes the piece just directs you as to what you're going to do with it. So there it is, all painted. So like I said, comment and tell me what you would do with it or what you'd like to see. But so I opted for the gingham pattern on the front of here with this transfer from Redesigned by Prima. So this was left over from a previous project that I mentioned before. So you really get your money's worth from these transfers. So I cut that one in half because I knew I was going to have to use two pieces. So it's so easy to do. You just peel the backing off. And in this case, when you have these checks, it's so easy because you basically have a grid that helps you line it up and put it into place. So I'm getting it all lined up, and as I apply the transfer, if you are interested in purchasing any of these transfers or any of the Dixie Belle products, I will have the link in the description box so that you can purchase. I keep looking at the camera when I do this to make sure that it hasn't flipped because I wasn't using a tripod. Like I said, I was just super itching to get my hands on a paintbrush, so I just propped the camera up and got started. So I'm particularly working on the outside edges because I want to sever it there and just have that design be on that crest or shield piece. So as I work with this, you will see that my direction kind of was dictated by what happens when I'm using this transfer. I was a little hasty and it didn't want to pull in that one spot. Well, actually I could have fixed that, but later on you'll see whenever I put the second piece of the transfer on, I should have burnished it a little more with my hands before I started to sand, but it's all good. There are no mistakes. If you make a mistake, sometimes that is a happy accident, and it just, like I said, in this case, it dictated what I did with the rest of the piece. So I, a lot of times, like to distress my pieces using waxes or sometimes glaze. I love gilding wax, and lately I've been into tinting waxes with color. So that's a fun thing to do, but I don't often sand my pieces to distress them. Sometimes I do a wet distress, but you'll see this is coming off pretty easily. Just keep working at it a little bit more. As you pull it off, you can do that. Some people like to do that method and other people don't, but regardless, that's the route I've chosen. So it's coming off pretty nicely, and I want to hurry up and get that rest of that transfer off of the edges, so I'm kind of carefully using that. Maybe tweezers would be a good tool for that, because essentially what you're transferring off of that paper is basically paint, so it will adhere to whatever. You can always get it off with sandpaper or paint over it too, but I just wanted to make sure I got the remaining part and just have it on the main part. So I hope that you all had a wonderful Christmas. I'm desperately looking for my sandpaper. Found it. Okay, so I just wanted to get the rest of that off the side. So when I'm looking in my video here, I'm not loving, the way I look because I had so many cookies and but I'm gonna get back to my Weight Watchers and to my biggest loser that my friend Brandy from Honeybee Reflexology puts on. She just had a baby, so she's anxious to get back on track, and so I'm sure everybody after Christmas is ready. So that's what we do. So anyway, you might hear me do a video about that. So I'm not sure why I got so close to the camera. Guess I wanted to make sure I was recording. But I had to cut off one row of checks because I had to make sure that it lined up. There I'm just kind of letting you see what I'm doing. So these transfers are fantastic because you don't have to use the whole thing. Stamps are great too, and molds, just because they're in one shape, that doesn't mean you have to use them that way. You do what you want. You can do parts of them, and as you see here, you can sand them off too. Some people sand them to distress them, and that was kind of what I started to do here. And you'll see I got a little carried away, which was the springboard for the rest of the direction I went. So again, I thought I was going in one direction, and now I have to recut because I realized I was going in the other direction. So I just keep putting it in place, lining it up. A couple extra minutes here saves you headache later. So I guess I've decided that I am happy with it. Well, I guess I've decided I need a closer look, so I'm having a seat, lining it up one more time. You've heard measure twice, cut once. Well, this is kind of the same thing. You want to make sure before you commit to that you are lining it up right. I'm confident, so I'm removing the back. And lining it up. Oh, I wanted to cut off some excess because why have that extra, especially down where that detail part is, because if I lean into that too much, I'm going to get the transfer on that, and I don't want it to stick to that part. You may hear my heater in the background. My store is in a very old building, and the heat is just a crazy situation. But when they're heating up, they click and clang and everything else. So if you hear that in the background, that's what you're hearing. And now I've lost my stick. There we go. Or applicator. They all come with a little applicator tool that you can use. And Dixie Belle also sells, Re-design sells an applicator that you can get on the website and the link that I'm posting as well. So I just usually use what's in there, but I'll definitely be trying that applicator stick eventually here. There's so many products that Dixie Belle carries that I haven't even tried yet. So we have so much now, like paint sprayers, and there's just so much. So there's spraying tint. So I'll get to it eventually, and I'll get it all tried and have it all in the store for you. Okay, so you can see that came off pretty nicely. So I know I'm spending a lot of time in this section, but here I come with the sandpaper. So I wanted to get it off the edges, which is an easy way to get it. So I'm working on that. And then what happens as I keep working it, I get to a point where I need to cover the line. So when I do that, I actually rub off a little bit too much. But that led me to the rest of my design. I decided to distress it with sandpaper before I went on. See the little spot in the middle? It's like, whoops. But then I just decided to distress it a little bit further, because that just makes it look like it's not the last thing you put on there, not like a sticker. You want it to look like it's part of the piece. So while you're watching, I hope you will consider subscribing to my channel, because I'm always trying something new and I want to show you on our step-by-step series. And as I mentioned, I like to go off on different subjects sometimes, like the Weight Watcher thing or different things. So please tune in, and I hope you enjoy at least every Saturday with the step-by-step series, and then we're popping new videos in all the time. So as you see, I just continue to sand randomly to distress, and this piece provided a lot of opportunity for cool distressing because of all the detail. Don't forget to comment about this piece or anything that you're working on. I love to hear from you. See, it's just a light sanding. That's a very coarse sandpaper, but it's just going over the details. So the next thing that happens, I think here I wanted to show you that area that was a bleed through. So you can see it's sort of a yellowish. I don't know whether it was from glue or what, or just the tannins in the wood. But here I'm using clear wax. I'm using an old chip brush that I've cut the bristles from. That makes it so that it's a little bit sturdier of a bristle, and you just covering the whole piece, just giving it a light once over. Try not to go too heavy on the wax, because then you just have to remove it, because then the piece feels like real greasy or oily. So you don't want to excessively wax it. So just give it a nice once over. And yes, I do wax over that transfer as well. You can seal transfers, and I've chosen to use the wax on this one. Checking the camera again just to make sure that you're still with me. Wax on, wax off, because that is exactly what you do. After you put the wax on, then you'll see that I take a soft cloth and I buff the wax, or I remove the excess wax. There's a lot of different ways that people do this, and this is just for this piece what I wanted to do. That's my trick brush twirling. Now I drop my brush. I look very serious sometimes. But this is actually one of the things that makes me most happy, is when I'm painting. Almost done here, and it doesn't take long to show you how I complete the rest of the side here. Just basically cut it in, and this is a wide brush, so just take a pretty wide swipes up and down the piece. The next part is the part I'm most excited about. I decided to use black wax on here to accent it. Okay, so here I am with the black wax, and I'm using a brush that's like a stencil brush. It's a small stencil brush. So I started with the handles, and I'm just going over those. And then immediately I take that soft cloth and just wipe back the excess wax. And what happens is, with all the detail on this piece, the dark wax stays in the crevices, and you're just wiping off the surface. So here's a close-up of the other handle. Look how dark it is. I know sometimes it's kind of scary when you use a dark wax, but because I used the clear wax previously, it floats on there. So it's really easy to remove the excess, but it'll still stay in the crevices. And then here's that detail part, and I can't wait to get my hands on that with the wax. So even though I did the sanding with the distress, and you can see a real close-up of that little spot on the transfer that came off that inspired the waxing or the sanding, distressing of the entire piece. So this, I'm just working the black wax into that detail, and again, we're going to go back and wipe off the excess. And just watch how easily this comes off and how great this looks. It just looks like it's been around forever. I like to make sort of a halo around the piece, the section that I'm working on. But you want to leave the concentration of the dark in the corners, in the crevices, as it would naturally gather. Okay. And we're doing the other side. And there's the finished piece. Just showing you some close-ups here. And I just love how this piece turned out. And again, don't worry when you make a mistake. That sometimes gives you the jumping off point of your next move. So join me every Saturday for Step by Step, and next week I'm going to start on a really cool project, so I hope you'll join me again. It's a little dresser for a little girl that's fierce inspired because the handles on the dresser are lions. So join me again, and I'm LaVonne from Step by Step. Please subscribe to my channel. Visit me on LaVintageDecor.company on my website, and on Facebook we're LaVintage Decor Altoona, and on Instagram we're LaVintage Decor. Thanks so much for watching.